Hello and welcome to today's session. In today's session, we are going to learn about news element vis-a-vis reportage. Now to start with, let me ask a question. Is news and reporting same? What is the common idea about news and reporting? Many of us, we think that they are synonymous. Well, the answer to this question is both yes and no. Yes, because colloquially, in our day-to-day speaking, writing, it means almost the same. But technically, all news are not reported and all reported stories are not always news. So, the idea of what makes an event news is a matter of academic discussion and understanding. Now, what is news? In this age of globalization, we all are reporters, we all are news givers, and we all are audience. How? I just tell you. In the social media, you can write about something and you can actually cater to a large number of audience without any infrastructural support. All you need is just a mobile phone and an app, and that too, the app is freely downloaded. So in that case, when I write about something which is happening in my locality, does it become a news? Well, to a certain extent, it does. And then I become a reporter. But when you talk about media as a whole, it is not that as simple as this example. A structured and logical presentation of events makes a news. And it is not as simple as a social media post all the while. So we need to understand in today's session what are the various elements which makes an event or an incident a news. For example, let me show you a few photographs and let us find out which one is a news. The first photograph is of two young boys riding the bicycle. Then we have a photograph of the Tulip garden of Srinagar. Then we have a photograph of Mr. Shah Rukh Khan, and then about a very unfortunate flight crash which happened recently is being shown. Out of these four photos, if I say each one is a news element, will you agree to it? Well, if you agree to me, it's fine. If you do not agree to me, it's even okay with me, because I will continue saying that all these four photographs that are being shown on your screen right at the moment are the news elements. Why? The Shah Rukh Khan celebrity personality is a news. The crash site photograph which is being shown is obviously a news which we all agree and which we all understand. Blooming of tulip at Srinagar is also a news, right? Because it attracts a lot of tourists. It has got a direct link with the economy of the state and of the country, and it is perhaps a very positive news. And then remains another photograph which shows two young boys riding the bicycle. My dear students, in today's scenario where we are all like locked up somewhere due to the pandemic, cycling in the open air is indeed a news. So we have to understand news from various perspectives. One perspective, and the most important perspective, is the situation on which it becomes a news. A simple photograph becomes a very positive news item when we all, the entire world is somehow locked inside their house for the last 1.5 years, right? So what is a news depends on what is the situation on which the news is being presented. News is everything that is new, that is happening. According to the dictionary of Merriam Webster, news is a report of recent events, previously unknown information, something having a specific influence or effect, a material reported in a newspaper or news periodical or on a newscast, a matter that is newsworthy. For example, all books of journalism has a very silly but very interesting example of news. That is, when a dog bites a man, that's a very regular event. It is no news. But when a man bites a dog, it is indeed a news because it is something which is unique. It is something which is unlikely. It is something which is atypical. So, the criterion by which news is judged are whether it is new, whether it is atypical, unique, whether it is interesting or significant for the audience to whom it is being catered to, and whether it is about people. So, when the farmers were agitating at Delhi border, that was a news. But if a farmer grows a crop, that is perhaps not a very unique news because he or she is supposed to do so, right? When the Prime Minister addresses the nation, it is a news. Why? Because it is something which is of significant value, significant importance to the entire nation. So, it is indeed a news. And the other thing is, which I told you just a while ago, that the personality himself is a news. Whether is it about people, when I say, of course, news has to be about people or else about whom it will be. So, when I say about people, so an entertainment story or a fashion story, is it not a news? Yes, it is also a news, but a soft news. And of course, that is also about people. What kind of people? People who are related to that particular industry, people who are interested in that particular industry, young people. So many are there. So, we cannot actually, diversify like which kind of news story will be of interest to the general public as a whole. That is why if you see a generic news capsule, you will find all kinds of news are there. If you see a newspaper, a daily newspaper, if you see a primetime television broadcast of news, or if you listen to a radio news, right? This categorization is very, very clear. Particularly in radio news, it is more understandable. It has a very important political news of the day. It has news about the economy. If there is something happening like something in the Sensex or in the share market, very important things happening, it will be there. It will have sports news and it will have human interest stories. Maybe a rickshaw puller's daughter scored very good marks in board examination or any all India entrance level test. So, human interest stories, significant stories. Maybe I do not know the person, but those stories are very motivational and inspiring, and people do like to listen to, read and watch those kind of stories. So, what are the elements of the news? Let me tell you now. Now, when we talk about the elements of the news, the first and the foremost element of the news is proximity. What do we understand by proximity? Proximity means location. Today, something happening in and around me will obviously affect me more than something happening on the other side of the world. A less significant event or incident around me is more important to me than something happening, more important happening in some other part of the world. So, proximity is very, very important. It impacts the reader or the audiences more than anything else, because we know somehow it is going to directly affect me. So, that is why every newspaper particularly has a local page. Even at times it has more than one local page. So, if we see a newspaper, we will find there's the first page of the newspaper, then there is a local page, city page, state page, nation page, there's an international page, and then sports and entertainment and etc. What is the reason for doing it in that way? because we can actually go onto the page, browse the newspaper, flip on the pages of the newspaper, move on to the page where I want to see the news I want. The second important element of news is prominence. So when we talk about prominence, we mean prominent people, prominent event, prominent places. Always makes news. As I have shown you, the Tulip Garden of Srinagar, whether we go there or not, it will always make its place in the newspaper and in other news medium, because the place is very important, and blooming of tulip once in a year is an event to be worth putting in the news media. Prominent people, we all know how important it is, whether it is the Prime Minister of the country, whether it is a superstar of Bollywood, whether it is the captain of the Indian cricket team, very, very important. Here we are talking about people with a positive prominence. There could be people with negative prominence also. Maybe a don is being caught. Some people who have done some kind of a heinous crime. Prominence, the person himself makes news. Right? So that is about prominent people. Prominent events. When we say prominent event, the Olympics, ICC World Cup, then the polling that happens throughout the year in some state or the other state, the carnivals, all these are prominent events. And another very prominent event that we can also talk about at this time when we are doing this kind of a curriculum is about the vaccination process, the event of vaccination all over the country at the same time with so much of population and all. It's a very, very prominent event and an important element of news. And prominent places. Prominent places. I just give you one example of prominent place. You will be able to understand it at one shot. That is, you see, during any kind of event that happens, Burj Khalifa lighting changes. During Independence Day, they show the tricolor flag of a country. During something else, they show that in the building itself, right? So the place itself makes news. So we all look for that particular picture in the newspaper or in the media, any other media, that what Burj Khalifa has given. Let me give you another a bit diverted example of how prominent place and event makes news. You must have seen the Amul advertisement. It changes every Wednesday with a very recent development in and around us. If you follow Amul advertisement, you will understand how prominent person, prominent events and prominent place makes news even in an advertising campaign. So these are very, very important element of news. Political bigwigs, film stars, sports personality, fashion designer, fashion models, so on and so forth, they actually make news. And apart from the political events or conferences, there are certain other events, or I would say activities, which also makes news. That those are like the trade fairs, international summits, conferences, film festivals, all these. So the events, prominent events and prominence places, we have already discussed how important it is when it comes to the news element. The next news element that we can talk about is timeliness. News has to be catered fresh. Stale news is no news. So whatever has happened yesterday is of no use to us today. So timeliness is very, very important element of news. But there are some events which remains a deep-rooted impact in our lives. And that goes beyond the concept of timeliness. Say, for example, 9/11 still creates curiosity, still creates interest in the audience's mind. The Republic Day and the Independence Day of our country actually gives opportunities, scope for a lot many news items to be presented in whatever media it is. So the gravity of the news depends a lot on its timeliness, But at the same time, especially the print media, they do go back to important events and do special stories on that, because the event itself was so important, the impact of the event was so high, that even after the so-called freshness or the so-called fresh timeliness is not there, a reoccurrence of the stories is always read or always seen or listened by the audience. The next element of news is oddity. That is, anything unusual, anything shocking, anything bizarre is an important news element, because we do not like to see things which are average, right? That we see around us every time. We are not interested in that. So when Lady Gaga makes a public appearance, that becomes a news because of her unique style, because of her out-of-the-box dressing, or whatever you want to say. Oddity also makes news. For example, novel coronavirus, something we knew nothing about. The term pandemic made a news, isn't it? If you remember 2020, March, April, the term pandemic, only one word, made headlines, because this was a word which was not known to us, many of us, I would say, before. So anything which is out of the average, out of the normal things that we are used to seeing and understanding is an element of news. One very interesting example of this oddity element of news is that in northern Denmark, an IKEA showroom turned into a vast bedroom. Why? Because around 6 customers and kind of 2 dozens of employees was stranded by a snowstorm and spent the night in the store. And they were very clever in spending the night in style, you know. They slept on the beds that are usually put for show, for customers to come and see, right? And this news became more popular than the weather condition of Denmark at that point of time, and it became a very, very popular news, right? It became a very popular news. So this is how oddity becomes a news. Though it was a weather news, this little brief anecdote made the news more interesting. The next one is, of course, consequence. What do we mean by consequence? That what would be the impact of the news in the minds of the people who are either reading it or who are either watching it or listening to it. You know, when it is listening, the impact is perhaps a little less. But when we see something very, very violent on the television set or on the digital medium or on the newspaper photograph, we also have to think about how to present that so that it does not negatively impact the minds of the audience. So this is again very important element of news. It's a very, very important element of news that we need to keep in mind. Conflict. We like to listen to and read about conflicts, right? Sometimes the conflict between 2 countries, between 2 bodies becomes a matter of academic research and understanding. But otherwise, any conflicting things makes news. Conflict between 2 religious groups, conflict between 2 teams playing a football match, conflict between business leaders, conflict of human rights violation, political conflicts, wars, of course, is a very, very important element of news. Conflict in the nature and in the outer space, all these things are actually a very important element of news. So when we have to remember what is the element, we have to remember it as the conflict element. The next element that we have in our mind is human interest. Yes, human interest stories generally comes in the anchor of a newspaper, and in primetime news also we find human interest stories, because, you know, end of the day, people want something to which they can relate to. News item is also something which we are catering to people, and if people cannot accept it, cannot take it for a longer period of time, then the credibility, the popularity of the news item will be lost. So human interest is one story that, or one element of a news story that is ever popular, right? Say, for example, I was going through a human interest story that in the zoos nowadays, in the local city zoos, you can actually adopt an animal. So that made a very interesting human interest story. Human interest stories about the self-help groups of any state or of any cluster makes very interesting read. So human interest is another very, very important element of news. The next element is extremes and superlatives. Anything extreme catches the reader's or the viewer's attention. Reporters and audience might be interested in the first, in the best, longest, smallest, highest, all these extremes, right? But in the process of doing so, we have to be careful about not exaggerating things. If we exaggerate things, it might turn into a boomerang for the news media house and for the reporter. Scandal. Scandal makes very interesting news, right? Whether it is the Sheena Bora murder case or anything like that. Wherever there is a scandal, everybody loves to listen. Impact. What would be the impact of COVID-19 vaccination on the general health of the people? A very important element of news. This example will perhaps make you understand what I mean when I say impact as an element of news. So these are the few elements which are important when we deal with news, when we deal with reporting, right? When we deal with writing or producing a news capsule. The second thing that we are going to learn here in this session is skills required by a reporter. Well, there are certain skills which I call them as technical skills, like a proper degree from a college or an university. The knowledge of grammar, language, in whichever language you are writing, and some other languages. Suppose I'm writing in Hindi or I'm writing in Bengali, I'm writing in Tamil. I must also know English because that is the global language, and I will have to do a lot of research in that language, right? So the language, knowledge of language is very important, and the updated knowledge of what is going around, current affairs, right, is important. This I put it in the technical skill. In the behavioral skill, which is very, very important, the first and the foremost is nose for news. If I do not know which one is news and which one is not, I will spend a lot of time finding a news for myself and for my audience, right? Nose for news, adaptability. Being able to adapt and adjust to situations. If I am not being able to do so, I will not be able to gather news from there. Time management, of course, that is very, very important. Networking skills, another very important thing, because a reporter survives on his or her networking skills. Unless there is a huge networking skill, a reporter cannot survive. Integrity, of course, very important. Leadership and teamwork. Sometimes you have to be the leader, you have to take the charge in your hand, and sometimes you have to work according to the team, what the team wants from you. Knowledge of structure and presentation. Each media house, each brand has its own structure of presenting news, right? Whether it is an electronic media or a print media, doesn't matter. The house structure has to be maintained by the reporter. The next one is understanding of law. I need to be absolutely thorough with the law, with the code of conduct and ethics, as per the PCI, that is the Press Council of India. If I'm not being able to do so, I might face problems with my writing, with my reporting. Handling media equipment, very important when it comes to electronic media, when it comes to new age media, camera, boom, lapel, everything, laptops, everything needs to be taken care of, worked properly and handled so that the best can be produced. A positive frame of mind and a sound health. Though I have put it as the last point, but let me tell you, this is very, very important because a reporter goes through a lot of hard work, a lot of negative situations where keeping a positive frame of mind becomes very difficult. So there you have to work upon yourself so that you remain positive in your attitude, do the work without getting emotionally and personally inclined towards it. At the same time, be responsible for what you are doing. And of course, a reporter's job is not an armchair job. He or she has to move around throughout the day. It's a physical work as well as a mental work. So a sound health is absolutely important for a reporter. So these are the qualities a reporter needs to have so that he or she can do the job well.